Hello, everybody. Welcome to Tartine in Quarantine, aka a Dovid in COVID, aka, oh, I've already forgotten all of them. Fools for Fools, aka We Need a Revolution. There were quite a few, but the one I settled on was Sourdo's and Sourdon'ts with Jenna Reynolds. I'm Jenna Reynolds, this is my kitchen, and I will make a bet with you. If you do not have the ingredients that you need to make sourdough bread at home right now, I will eat a spoonful of sourdough starter live because YouTube loves that kind of thing. But I'm probably not going to have to because the ingredients are not particularly complicated. I have all of them here in front of me. Flour, water, and salt. I'm serious, that's all you need. You hear a lot of hubbub about people wanting to order sourdough starters online, and this sourdough starter used in a San Francisco bakery is 160 years old and all that kind of stuff, but frankly, you hear on the news about a yeast shortage, and I kind of chuckle a little because there's no such thing as a yeast shortage. It's on your hands, it's in your flour, it's in fruit skins, it's in the air all around us, and all you need is flour, preferably unbleached, and you can make sourdough bread. Now, I promise I'm going to explain things a little bit more, quite a lot more actually, but time is the fourth ingredient, and we need to start now if we're going to make this in time. But first, always put on your apron. I have never baked anything and not gotten flour entirely down my front. Your apron need not be quite as dirty as mine, but I like to think of it like being an 18th century doctor walking into the operating theater just sort of pre-covered in blood, and the patients think, oh wow, that's really encouraging. That doctor has done one of these before. Hopefully. All right, so if you take a look here, this is very simple. You add your flour to a bowl. This is 450 grams of flour. To that, you add 350 grams of water. Why 350 grams of water? Get there. Easy. And then for this, we are going to add our salt right away. There is a little bit of controversy about adding your salt this early, but it doesn't matter. It's fine. Then you're just going to mix that up, and you are going to have a dough that is simultaneously too wet and also too dry. It should be shaggy and sticky. And there are really two kinds of people in the world. There are people who look at a dough like this and they think, wow, that is so shaggy, that needs more water. Or they look at it and say, that is so sticky, that needs more flour. Well, you're both wrong because we forget the last ingredient, time. So this is going to take 30 minutes for all of the water to fully absorb into the proteins in the flour in a stage called autolysis. Autolysis is one of the most important stages that people usually forget when making bread, but this is where the gluten comes from. And when you're making a freestanding loaf, that is a loaf that isn't supported on its sides by a baking pan, it needs to have a really strong internal structure in order to keep its shape and have a good rise without collapsing and becoming dense. You need a lot of gluten for that. So today we're not even going to think about whole wheat and other kinds of, non-glutinous flours. We're going to be talking entirely about white flours, particularly bread flour, but if all-purpose is all you have, we can make it work. Let's just not get into the more complicated stuff. Baking bread is really simple, but it's also kind of complicated too, for reasons that will become clear soon. All right, I'm going to get started, turn on my timer for 30 minutes and wash some of this crud off. So, if you take a look in the description of this video, you will see the class notes. There's a whole lot of goodies in there, everything you need from the formula and the schedule I'm using for this particular loaf. Also, substitutions. Not everybody has all the things that you're going to need here. I've got a lot of fun baking toys that you may not have here in quarantine or not have a way to get. And there's other things that you can do. I find great comfort in the fact that, hi Harley, hello Sam, I find great comfort in the fact that sourdough bread was almost certainly first made on accident. Seriously, it just happens. It's like alcohol. It's so easy to make on accident and so hard to make really good, but I have never messed up bread so irrevocably that I was like, that's not bread. I'm not going to eat that. It's always just like, that's pretty good. It's like pizza. When it's bad, it's fine. So the first thing we're going to talk about is that weird thing that I said just a second ago that you might have skipped over. I didn't say recipe when I was talking about the bread. I said formula and schedule. That's kind of a semantic thing. Recipe works too, but I'd like to draw a firm distinction because recipes are things for pastry bakers. They're things for cooks sometimes. Recipes are really, really good for telling you exactly how to do things, but frankly, there are far too many variables at work when you're baking bread. The temperature, the humidity, the time of year, the gluten content in your flour, its protein structure, even the country that you are in matters. If you ask a Japanese baker how much protein content is in just their normal flour, they'll give you a number that is more similar to our cake flour. Ask them about bread flour, and they'll tell you something more similar to our all-purpose. And the kind of bread flour that we use here is you'd have to special order that. There's so many variables. Recipes will lead you astray because they will give you specific numbers and things to shoot for, and you'll try and do that, and it won't work. And you'll be confused, and you'll be like, oh, what's wrong with this recipe? But recipes, let's try and steer away from that. Instead, we are going to use formulas. Now, a formula it's kind of like a recipe, but broken down, and it's usually given in this very specific kind of format. So I'm going to bring this pad of paper here over to this camera, and I will hold it up so you can see it. But now that I've talked at length about how simple sourdough baking is, let's move on to everybody's favorite part, math. So here's the thing about baker's percentages or baker's math. It's not that complicated. It looks a little bit scary, but pretty much whatever flour you're using, and today we're going to be using 100% the same flour, entirely white flour. Whatever the weight of that is, we are going to define our flour as 100%. Just bear with me here. We are just going to define it as 100%. Now, everything else in your recipe is given in baker's percentages. Now, baker's percentages are given in relationship to that 100% that is your flour. When people talk about bread, they'll usually say something like hydration, and they'll say the hydration is 70%, like that. Now, what does that mean? 100 plus 70 is 170. That's more than 100%. So unless you're making 2 loaves, you can't just add those up and have that make sense. No, hydration percentage means, and just like all other baker's percentages, that there is 70% as much water as there is flour. So let's put some numbers to this. So if the amount of flour that we have is a kilogram, yes, we're using metric, and so will you for reasons that will become abundantly clear. We have 1,000 grams or a kilogram of flour. Now, if we multiply that number times 70% or 0.7, we get 700 grams of water. It's that simple. You can scale this up and you can scale it down to any size you like, and this will hold true. You are not beholden to making a single loaf. You are not beholden to making 2 loaves if they say so and cutting it in half and all that. You can just multiply it by the percentages. Now, most recipes and formulas call for about 2% salinity, 2% salt. And so using that same method, 2% times 1,000 grams is, correct me if I'm wrong here, but I believe that is 20 grams. That is the perfect way to define your bread. Save one more thing, because the last ingredient is your starter. Now, your starter is just flour and water and time, so I'm not counting it as a separate ingredient, but the amount of starter that you use in your dough matters. It's called your inoculation. like you get inoculated with a shot. You're introducing microbial activity into your dough at a certain percentage. If you're using 10% inoculation or 10% starter, that means that your starter has a baker's percentage of 10%. And that 10% of 1,000 grams in our example here is 100 grams of starter, just like that. Using just this formula here, I can make a loaf of bread. If you give me these 4 things and hand them to me and say, here's my formula, make this loaf, I can do it. Because the important thing here is the relationships to one another. As far as controlling our last ingredient, time, there is scheduling, but the scheduling is very flexible, and that's where so many of the variables come in. Because if it's warmer, it's going to ferment quicker. And you need to accommodate for that, and you need to look at it and trust your gut. Not the recipe, not me. You will fine-tune your gut over time, and I will give you tests to tell if your gut is on the right track. But ultimately, all of this stuff goes out the window if you say, I think this bread is overproof, and if I don't get this out and into the fridge to retard, or if I don't get in the oven now, it's gonna overproof. Do it. Just because the recipe says one thing, you gotta listen to the dough. This isn't making pastry. You don't have to follow the recipe exactly, because the recipe doesn't know what your kitchen is like. You do. So I know that right now it is 71 degrees in here, looking at the thermostat real quick, which is actually a pretty ideal temperature, frankly. I have, in a colder kitchen, it will take more time to do certain things. In a warmer one, everything will just be happening super quick, relatively speaking, 6 hours instead of 12. But yeah, moving on from there, we have our formulas. Now, this example formula that I gave is just to make the numbers easy. It's not the formula we're going to be using today, and it's not the one that I recommend you use either. I have included the formula and the schedule that I'm going to be using in the class notes. So let's see here. Talked a little bit about that. Okay, so the next thing that we want to take a look here is we have our dough right here. It's still very dry and craggly. It's still absorbing all of that water. We're going to help it out, and to make sure that there's no lumps that kind of got left there, we're just going to give it a quick little knead. And this is the only kneading we are going to be doing in this entire recipe. You hear a lot of hubbub about no-knead breads and that kind of stuff, but for the most part, kneading for a freestanding loaf is very aggressive. You're going to tear all of those gluten strands that you worked so hard to get. All I want to do here is make sure all of that flour is damp and exposed to water so that we can maximize our gluten, get all of that hydrated, and just work that in. Our timer is not yet up. We're not done with the auto lease. We just want it to happen evenly. I've made bread that turned out just kind of a little bit lumpy. You can look inside and see little clumps of flour. It's fine, but it doesn't have to be that way. And don't be afraid to get messy. It's gonna happen. You can wash your hands after. I recommend short nails. You can do it without, but you're gonna use your hands. You can't use a stand mixer for this. There are specialized machines, but you're not going to get one. You're not going to want one. They're for big restaurants who can't do all this stuff by hand, but you can. Use your mitts and wash off. Now you will notice my hand washing technique is not the recommended technique. That's because I washed my hands before and I'm just trying to get the dough off. Way off. All right, jeez. Okay. Let's check my timer here. So this can go for quite a bit longer, but already, if you take a look at it compared to how it was before, it's starting to become just a bit more cohesive. It's really hard to look at it when you first start and think this is going to be anything, but just give it time. It'll absorb. So real quick, if you take a look at the class notes, you don't have to. I'm going to be mostly reading this out. I touched briefly on metric and why we use metric. And if the simplicity of that math didn't tell you, the fact that really all formulas are going to be given in that is reason enough to use it. But also the simple fact of the matter is that you are going to be using water, and milliliters is defined as 1 milliliter is equal to 1 gram of water. It makes things very simple when you're trying to do baker's percentages in relation to grams of flour and need to figure out all the water and stuff. It's very easy to convert. Moreover, it's just better for precise things. Sorry, it is. So that's going to be what we're using for this. As far as how we're going to move forward using that, let me see what I wanted to talk to y'all about. Okay. So in the class notes, there is this. This is a contract. I went to a notary, and I had to make a contract for you to sign. It's very legally binding. I'm sure you've read over it already, but in case you haven't, I will read it for you. I state your name, hereby solemnly swear to measure my compactable ingredients by their mass and not their volume. I swear to never give measurements of flour in units of cups and to always use grams. I will never post a recipe on the internet where I can see it and get frustrated with you. And I will never post it in which I define my bread by the cups of flour it uses and will instead give it in grams, along with the water content in grams, as well as its hydration percentage, or just enough information to be able to calculate that. I certify that I understand that the volume of flour depends on the degree to which it is compacted and its density, and that volume is an unreliable, subjective, and irreplicable unit of measurement for flour. I swear that should Jenna break into my house in the middle of the night and shake me awake while screaming, "How does one measure flour?" I will respond with, by mass, by weight, in grams, or some other such correct response. I swear that should I not have access to a scale, I must measure by volume. I will place the measuring cup, if I must measure by volume, I will place the measuring cup on the table and lightly scoop flour into the cup and level with a straight edge to produce a consistent and replicable level of compaction equivalent to approximately 125 grams, and that I will only do this as a last resort. I swear that I will not scoop the measuring cup directly into a bag of flour, which would cause it to compact in a way that is much less replicable. I understand that should I break the terms of this very legally binding and absolutely real contract, Jenna can put a little clown nose on me and clown makeup because I am a clown who measures flour in cups when making bread like clowns do. And then if you could just print your name legibly so I can read it, date it, I believe it's the 17th, and then sign and just mail that to me. If you can get to a notary, great. Otherwise, I will do it for you, and I will hold you to it. Measuring grams. Flour, as you apply force to it, its volume can decrease by up to half. So if you've ever made bread from, a mommy blog recipe before and it didn't work very well, a common reason for that is because often they give the amount of flour in cups, and I'm like, I don't know what to do with that. That could be anything. That could be any weight of flour because its density depends on its compaction. All right. So now that I've lectured you enough, it's actually not that important, but please, it's better. Okay. So a little bit of brief, and I swear I will keep it brief, history about sourdough. I'm one of those people that I got into this because, you watch movies like, Howl's Moving Castle, and you see Sophie like with that big crusty loaf of bread, and she like tears off a piece of it with the cheese, and you're like, oh shit, that looks good. There's some charm to sourdough bread that way that I always wanted to get into. And so for me, bread has always been tied up in history. It's this very, very old human tradition. The story of humanity is the story of grains, of bread, and of rice, depending on which parts of the world. Here we're talking about flour, the oldest known excavated piece of leavened bread is from 3700 BC, dug up in Switzerland. But almost certainly bread is thousands of years older than that. The leavened variety probably dates back at least a few thousand years earlier to Mesopotamia or ancient Egypt in the Fertile Crescent and the Middle East. We have evidence in hieroglyphics of ancient Egyptians making bread in much the same way. I have here something rather interesting. So this is an excerpt from A Brief History of Vice by Robert Evans, a very good book. It's about the history of sex, drugs, alcohol, and how those things have affected the way that civilization has developed. We kind of like to push those parts of history off to the side a little bit, but they actually have had a very deep and impactful part in this broader story. Bread ties into this because the very first recipe that we have of anything is ancient Sumerian from 1800 BC for bread, and that bread, or not for bread, for beer that uses bread in the process of making it. So the very earliest recipe known to archaeology is an ancient Sumerian guide to brewing beer. It's written in form of a hymn to the goddess of beer, Ninkasi, literally the lady who fills the mouth. Sexual innuendo apparently had not been invented yet. And it describes in detail the ancient Sumerian beer brewing process. That process started with the baking of bread made from barley flour, malted barley, and honey. Delicious as that sounds, this bread, bapir, wasn't for eating. It would be baked twice and stored until the time came to crumble it into a mixture of smashed dates and water, and then brewed into a hearty, unfiltered beer. This probably wasn't the first beer in history, but it's the first beer, the first anything that we have a recipe for. And I think that matters. In the middle of all this crazy, I find it really comforting that for the last 10,000 years, people have been making bread in much the same way that we're about to here. They didn't go to the store and buy yeast. They did it like this, and they didn't understand why. It worked, but they did it anyway. They were doing it before you had to bake a loaf to buy a slice, and they'll be doing it long after. If all these things that we took as written in stone, that the second the C word happened, everything kind of went out the window. If none of those things ever come back, I promise you, people will still be baking bread just this way. So I think this has gone on long enough for Autolyse. It would probably ideally go longer, but luckily here, unlike, you're probably not using the same flour as me. I'm using, just because it was the only thing in stock and I had been looking for an excuse to order it for a long time, I'm using a big 25-pound bag of like specialty, locally milled bread flour, really nice stuff with a high protein content that builds up a lot of gluten. So the Autolyse isn't as hugely important, but if you're using supermarket bread flour, it is. Give it 45 minutes to an hour. And if you're using all-purpose flour, probably feed your starter. We'll loop back around to that, and mix up your ingredients and let that sit overnight. Just let it get fully hydrated, because you want to get all the gluten out of your all-purpose flour as you can, because there's just not a whole lot of it. I'm going to fill up some water to dunk my hands in to make handling this wet dough easier real quick. A quick note on that. Wet things don't stick to wet things, and dry things don't stick to dry things. If you want to handle really wet dough like this is an 80% hydration. I briefly mentioned the numbers, but when you account for the starter, that's going to be 100 grams, 50 grams of water, 50 grams of flour. It was 450 grams of the bread flour and 350 of water. That's an 80% hydration. That's pretty high. It's a little bit harder to work with, but because of the protein content of this flour, it's fine for me. For you, if you're using all-purpose, you're probably going to want to go for more like 75%, if not lower. Trust your gut. It should be wetter than you think, but not too wet to work with. Okay, so before I start mixing this up a bunch and tightening those gluten strands, I don't want to rip them, so I want to get my starter ready. So this starter here is, I don't actually know its proper name. Usually starters are given names that even when you separate them and give them to your friends, they're supposed to like hold on to that name, and it's part of this like lineage. And if you make your own, you get to name this new starter that when you give it to your friends, they honor that. And it's this really cool tradition. I don't actually know it because the friend from blacksmithing who gave this to me, she didn't remember what its name was or its exact progeny. She said that it's around 200 years old, and her teacher who gave it to her said it's from the old country. We don't know which old country that would be. I assume something Western European. But in absence of that, I have dubbed it Old Country. So the first test that I'm going to be teaching you here, there are 3 main tests that you need to know that will take the place of very specific recipes and let you kind of go by your gut here. The first is the float test. Hopefully this works. This is the 3rd loaf of bread I've baked today, so the starter may be feeling a little tired, so it may not work. But either way, we will proceed. You're just going to take a spoonful of that, and this is cold water. This is ice water that the ice is melted in. And you're going to spoon off a little of that starter here in the water. Perfect. See that? See how it floats right there on the top? That is because it is buoyant due to the high quantity of air bubbles in it. Those air bubbles are carbon dioxide released by that wild yeast. And even though this is old, it is still wild yeast. We have cultivated it, but it started the way all starters do. So this is ready to use. So we're going to loop back around in a little bit when we have a little bit more time to talk about how to create your own starter. But I promise you, it's really easy. You're going to think it's gone horribly wrong, but you just got to persevere. It just takes time. Okay. So first thing we're going to do is I am going to place my too big bowl on my too small scale, but it is the only one that was transparent. So we'll work with it. And I'm going to tare it out to 0. And I'm going to add 100 grams of starter. That is a very high inoculation. That is a 20% inoculation. That is going to let you bake a sourdough loaf in a single day, which normally the classic Californian style, the San Francisco sourdough, is usually made over a 4-day period. And my personal favorite loaf to bake, I make just over 2. I prepare everything the night before and then bake the next day. But this will let you do it in 1. So we're going to go for a high inoculation here, 20% or 100 grams. And by the way, if you guys got questions, I'm moving kind of fast here. Write them out in chat, and Josh, our lovely tech guy, is going to be going through and collecting some of those questions. And we're going to have 2 Q&As a little bit later in the stream. All right, I'm sitting at 58, a little bit more, 87, and I'm really using a lot of the starter. Not a whole lot is remaining. That's about 100. If you take a look in there, can you see that? There's not a whole lot left. Maybe a tablespoon if I was really to collect all of that in there. That's okay. This is a very vigorous, healthy starter, and you actually don't want a whole lot in there, because if you want to be vigorous and healthy, you need a young population of yeast in there. So you want to just have a little bit of that vigorous yeast, give it a lot of food, let it grow rapidly, and then you have a large, young, vigorous population of yeast that's going to rise really quickly. It's not going to be particularly sour, but it will give a lot of rise. In order to get that sour taste, you need to do this to a smaller thing of dough and then ferment that. That's called a levain or a leaven, and you do that or a pre-ferment, and you do that for a longer period of time to get that sour taste. All right. So we'll get into how to make one of these. Don't worry. Okay, so I have my flour, my water, my salt, and now my starter. This is the part that's a little bit messy, a little bit gross, because you just kind of got to get in there. And I try and fold the dough over the starter so it doesn't leak out too much, like just a really bad gas station burrito. Not that I would know. And you're going to fold that in just like that. So it's not mixed in there super well, but it'll get there because we're going to be doing a lot more with this. So the first thing you need to know that if we're not going to be kneading it, we do need to work the dough in order to tighten up all those gluten strands. But we're not going to do it with kneading. We're going to use something that is much more gentle, effective, and reliable, which is the stretch and fold method. It's going to involve stretching out those gluten strands and then letting them relax, which is going to elongate them permanently rather than stretching them out and letting them fall back together, or if you really force them, causing them to tear. So all you're going to do, and it's not going to work very well at the beginning, but I'll show you what it looks like after. we are just going to reach our hand under there and just using gravity, lift up, stretch that dough, and see how that tore right there? It's not going to be doing that later. And just drop it back over, rotate 90 degrees, scoop back in, stretch, fold, rotate 90 degrees, stretch, and see it's not stretching very much anymore. That is because the gluten is tightening up. I can probably get away with one more, and you're just gonna feel it. You could do as many as 8 if you have a lower gluten content flour, like all purpose, and you're just gonna be like, oh, that's not stretching very much anymore. That's when you stop. Finish up, get there, and already compare this to that shaggy dough that we started with. It's still kind of grainy and rough, and there's starter still leaking out of it, but already it's a whole world of difference than where we started with. So real quick, I'm going to wash off my hands. Again, that's a bit of a pattern, as you can see. I'm going to fridge that, and then I'm going to show you what it's going to look like after. So take a look as this is going to sit at room temperature, and we are going to do a stretch and fold every 30 minutes for 2 to 2.5 hours. And that's going to be the beginning of our bulk rise. And then once it passes the window pane test, the second of our tests, we'll be able to move on to the next stage. Now, just to show you what a failed window pane test looks like, let's come back over here to my hands. So if I reach out like this and I try and stretch this dough out, oh man, my flour is good. This is already actually working pretty dang well. Okay, but see there, see how it tore a little hole in it? That means that the dough isn't yet elastic enough. I haven't built up enough gluten. It did pretty dang good because this is good flour. If you're using all-purpose, it won't work. I promise you. It does. You have very, very good, very high protein content all-purpose, which really isn't all-purpose, is it anymore? Okay, so I'm going to wash up. I'm going to fridge this, and I'm going to show you what this is going to look like after it's bulk ferment. After 2 to 6 hours, it's just going to look a little bit different. So let's cut to that time lapse. All right. So as you can see, not much happened. It didn't really rise very much. I thought it was going to be a little bit more impressive, frankly. But the thing is about this style of sourdough, it doesn't actually rise all that much in the bulk fermentation. It's better to underprove your dough than overprove it. Yeah, overproving it is irreversible. Once you've overproved it, you're going to have a flat loaf. And you'll look at it, and if you're not experienced in these kinds of things, you'll look at it and be like, oh, it didn't rise enough. But the thing is, it rose too much and then collapsed back down. We're not working with baker's yeast. We're working with wild yeast. It's not going to, recipes will often call for, wait till it doubles or trebles in size. This isn't going to do that. It's going to get slightly bubbly. And when you shake it, it's going to like jiggle. And it may rise 30 to 50% depending on the style. This one didn't, but I could tell it was done proofing because I could see visible bubbles in it, and I baked 3 of them before this week. Okay, so I'm going to switch this out for the one I prepared earlier. I went on Nextdoor, that website. It's like social media for you and your neighbors. And I was like, please, I'm going to have 6 sourdough loaves in my house. We eat them pretty quick, but we can't eat them that fast. Help us. Okay. I know I've promised one person in here also to come pick up a loaf while social distancing. Okay. Yes, I know. I already did it. All right, so unfortunately, this one is not in a transparent bowl because I only had my stand mixer bowl, just the one. So I'm going to do my best. But if you look in there, it's very smooth, very supple. There are some visible bubbles in it. If you could see it from the side through the clear bowl, you would see even more bubbles. But let's take a look at that window pane test. Take a look how that looks like now. I'm just going to reach my hand in here, and you can't see, but I am just using the tips of my fingers to loosen it from the side of the bowl, like you should before you do a stretch and fold. And if I take this and just pull it out like that, here, I can get above it. Can you see that? All right. So you should be able to make out your skin tone through it. That's why it's called the window pane test, because you should be able to see light through it like a window. With this angle, it's hard for you to see, but I can see going the other way. I can make out the red of my skin behind it. And I have pretty light skin, so the fact that I can do that means that it is very very elastic. I mean, it is very skin. We can compare. It's pretty close. It's about the right color, frankly. I've been inside too long. Okay, so while that sits there for a little bit, it's a little bit stiff right now because it was in the refrigerator. Yours doesn't need to be in the refrigerator. I just need to slow it down so that it'd be ready during the class and not before. So I put it in the refrigerator. That's why the schedules are so flexible. If it needs to be slow, you put it in the fridge. If it needs to be fast, you put it somewhere warm, and you just go by the tests. You can speed it up, slow it down. It's up to you. I've linked in the description some very useful schedules from Pro Home Cooks, a YouTube channel. I wanted to link it directly, but it felt dubious, so it'll take you through his site, and you got to sign up. But they're really useful. They'll give you lots of different example schedules, and again, don't take these as gospel. They're just sort of a good guideline. You get like the 1-day bake, where it starts at 10 p.m. the night before. You do a few things, you go to bed, and then you wake up and you're just kind of working all day, but then you have a loaf by 7 p.m. that night. There's a more flexible one where there's several decision points where you can tell, I don't feel like doing this anymore. I'm gonna put it in the fridge, come back to this later. There's one for the Nighthawk baker, if you like working at night and then want a good loaf in the morning. And by morning, I mean like noon. Time doesn't matter anymore. We're in quarantine. There's a 9 to 5 bake. So, I mean, this was more applicable when we didn't work at home. I worked 9 to 5, but I'm still baking using the 1-day bake sort of model because, I'm going to go on a bathroom bake. Does a few stretch and folds, puts it back. Okay, I'm back. It's very easy. Then there's this one. Mad props if you do this. The real baker. You got to get up at 5 in the morning for this one. But then your bread is ready by 1, fresh bread. So that's real nice. Okay, so let's talk starters. You saw me use mine. You saw the results that you can get with it. But if you don't have one, how do you make one? And the answer is you get a jar and you put some flour in it and you put some water in it and you wait. There's already yeast in the flour. That's all you have to do. Now, if that's all you did, all of the sort of bad bacteria that we associate with like spoiled food and moldy bread and stuff would take over and it'd get really gross. And it would not be a starter. Don't bake with that. What you have to then do is add more flour and more water. And what that's going to do is continue to feed the good yeasts that we do want. I have like a little 1 page in the notes on how to make it, and I talk a bit about how there is a war going on in that jar, and you need to fund the ones that you want to win. In this case, the yeast. You need to make conditions that are good for them and bad for the rest. And luckily for us, the conditions that are good for the yeast we do want is bad for the rest. And when the yeast is doing well, they produce acetic and lactic acid, which are major flavor components to sourdough bread, that kill off everything else, the stuff that you don't want. Sourdough starter is stable at temperature, room temperature, so long as you keep feeding it, because it will kill off everything else. It's fermented, and it means it's safe because, yeah, it's full of bacteria, but it's the kind of bacteria we want, so it's fine. They'll kill off everything else. So I talk about it a little bit more on the page, but you just keep feeding the thing. And once you get up to the jar being full, or about halfway full in this case, you need to start discarding. So discard is kind of like a touchy subject. I feel like there's a lot of think pieces right now for, I don't know, journalists who have too much time on their hands talking about how all these millennials are getting into sourdough baking and it's very wasteful, which is, as I've talked about, an extremely ahistorical perspective to take. People have been doing this for 10,000 years. A living being takes in food and it excretes. You wouldn't call eating and then pooping wasteful. We're trying to keep something alive, and that means that once the yeast has lived its life, it's a colony, it's going to turn into alcohol and then vinegar. The alcohol is called hooch. Yeah, that's where we get the word hooch. So you're going to need to toss that stuff. Now, you don't need to waste it. It still tastes good. It's just not conducive to the continued life of the starter. So with that discard, you can either, one, bake with it, because the discard is the very thing that I just put in to this dough, or if you're not going to do all that and you're just trying to feed your starter so you can bake later or what have you, you take a small pan, put a little olive oil in it, dump out your starter right into the pan, put in, if you have them, some scallions, some salt, maybe some sesame seeds, sesame oil. Yeah, there's all sorts of things that you can do, and you get sort of this funky fermented kind of pancake thing going on. And it's pretty nice. You can get that every morning, and you're feeding your starter, and it's making itself, and it's super easy. It's a great little breakfast thing. And sourdough stuff, because of the way that the proteins are broken down in it, is actually pretty healthy. Carbs are kind of out of style right now in sort of the eye of diets and that kind of stuff, but really, sourdough bread's kind of the best that you can do as far as carbohydrates go. It ain't no Wonder Bread, trust me. It was good enough for 10,000 years of human civilization. It is damn good enough for me. Okay, so last thing we're going to do before we go to a Q&A. So I haven't had a chance to really take a look at the chat. Hopefully Josh has been taking down some of y'all's questions. We are going to move on to our pre-shaping. So this dough has been bulk rising, and it is now a pre-shape. So the first thing that you're going to want to do is well flour up your countertop. This is a clean countertop that I cleaned up before. We're going to be working directly on the counter. I know my mom is here. My mom has counters with grout on them. Those aren't super good for this because they kind of catch a lot of particulate. That isn't the one that we want. They can catch all sorts of other microbial stuff. It's not great for that. So instead, if you have grouted countertops or just countertops that are just sort of dubious for putting your food directly on, even if they're clean, these are quartz, so it's fine. So if you lay down a wet paper towel or a wet dish towel, if you're feeling so inclined, and then put a wooden butcher board or cutting board right on top, that'll keep it from moving. It'll jiggle a little bit, but it's good enough for government work. It'll be fine. So I'm going to work directly on the countertop because I'm fortunate enough to have this style. So first things first is I'm going to reach my wet hand right into this bowl, and I am going to, I'm going to flour up the exposed upper surface of it right there. And I'm going to turn the flour onto the flour just like that. All right, is this good? Can y'all see what I'm doing here? All right, we're about to do a lot of very hands-on kind of stuff. This is the part that I would say is hardest about sourdough baking, is manipulating the dough, because it's not like cake. It's not like a loaf kind of bread where you just kind of pour it in and let it do its thing. There's actually a very specific way that you have to build the structure. It's kind of like tempering steel for any of the blacksmiths in the audience or metalworkers. It's the internal structure and stresses on it have to be working in exactly the right way. And you want to build up stress in such a way that it cradles itself and supports itself. And there's 100 different ways that you could do that. We're going to be making a boule, or French for ball, a round freestanding sourdough loaf, and I'm going to show you one way that you can do that. So first of all, we're going to take our sloppy mess, and we are going to, just to begin to tell it about its future as a loaf of bread. This is not going to be the final shaping. This is called the pre-shape. We're just going to tell it what it's going to be. So we're going to stretch it out into a rough sort of rectangle here, like that. And then we are going to take 1/3 of it vertically, going this way, 1/3 of it, and we're going to fold that over the middle third, just like that. And there was flour on this side. There was no flour on this side. It'll adhere to itself super well. Then you're going to take the other side and turn it over just like that. Press down, even it out, just like a letter. Now this is looking as little like a ball as is possible for anything to look at this point. But now for this. I'm going to take my bench scraper. This is probably my most important tool. If I had one tool for baking bread, it would be the oven. But the second one would be the bench scraper. If you don't have a bench scraper, any sort of I don't have one. Any sort of metal spatula will do just fine. You can use a plastic spatula so long as it's pretty dang flat and you flour it up. The dough might want to stick to it. The idea is this is very thin and the dough isn't going to want to stick to this as much as my fleshy thingies. So what we're going to do with our bench scraper, and if you don't have anything that could work, just use your hands up and it'll be fine. So I'm going to get under here. And I'm going to grab here and I'm going to roll it up lengthwise, just like that. And then I'm going to pull down just so it kind of covers itself. I can press those seals down, kind of like a dumpling, but don't worry so much about it being a good seal. Nothing's going to spill out. It's all the same thing. And already, it is not yet the shape we want, but it is building up the kind of structures that are going to let it be a loaf later. So as this bench rests for a little while, I built up all this tension in those stretch and folds and in shaping this right now, and I want it to be very loose, like I just had a day in the spa. So I'm just going to let it go there, and you can see I'm going to, so normally, no, it's in the fridge. Dang, I wish I had the glass bowl for this. I just cover it with a bowl like that, and when we come back to it and I lift this up, it's going to flatten out somewhat. Not as much as it was before. It'll still have an idea of its shape, but we do this one more time, and then we're going to be able to move on to the final shape, and where we get this kind of water balloon with this tight, glutinous skin on the outside and all of this soft, watery dough on the inside, which is full of these little air pockets. And when it hits that hot oven, it is going to rise a lot. It didn't rise very much when we did our bulk rise, counterintuitively, but the oven spring, it's going to double in size at least. It's going to get a lot bigger, and we're going to have to do some things to accommodate that massive rise that's going to happen here. In order for it to do that, it's got to have a good skin and a nice wet inside. Oh, that's the other thing. My oven has been preheating this whole time with a Dutch oven inside it at 500 Fahrenheit. 500. That is probably, if you're like me, that is probably hotter than you've baked anything before. Some recipes just say as high as your oven can go, 550, 600 degrees. Because you want just this massive oven spring, and you have a very short window where that's possible. It's only possible while the dough is elastic enough for it to stretch, because once it's cooked, it freezes in place. And so wherever it is there, you better hope that it's right. So it's got to rise as fast as possible. 500 degrees with the Dutch oven. So I can't take it out now to show you. Well, I suppose there's no reason I can't, actually, now that I think about it. Hold on. Let me glove up. My hands are still kind of floury, but it should be fine. I'm going to show you what the Dutch oven looks like if you haven't seen one before, but it's very hot. So I'm going to briefly just show you on this camera here, and then I'm going to put it back, because currently this is iron at 500 degrees. So it's pretty hot. This is a Dutch oven. It has a lid. It has sides. Woo, woo, woo. It's very hot. So these gloves, I really like them. They have individual fingers so that I can do things like lifting the dough and putting it into the Dutch oven. What you get in flexibility and the sort of the more nimble ability to handle things, you lose in its heat protection. So I can handle iron that hot for 3 or 4 seconds before it starts to burn me. So you still have to work quick. It's better than ungloved, and it's also better than the big heavy gloves for this purpose, but it's still a risk. So if you're going to use these, do be careful. You can still burn yourself. They just buy you a little bit more time. All right. So that's back in the oven. That is still staying nice and hot. All right. Okay. So timer's on that thing, but it's pretty loose. This was already doing pretty good on the gluten stretcher. So I haven't been keeping a huge eye on the chat, but right now, while this is going bench rest, yay, mom chat out, hates the grout. Yeah, I know. Countertop envy. I had no part of this. I'm really lucky. I happened to get into baking bread once I had this countertop. I said, yes, quartz. It's awesome. So Josh, if you're able to put a couple questions on the screen. Okay, so if flour equals X, hydration equals 0.7X, and so on, correct. So your flour is the variable by which all other things are judged. And the number that you put in front of X isn't necessarily 0.7. That's a separate variable. Flour is your X and hydration is your Y. It could be something else. 70% is a pretty low hydration, actually. If you're used to other kinds of bread, that'll sound very high, but it's pretty low. I like to go for 80%, if not higher. So whatever that variable is, you turn it into a decimal and then multiply it by the quantity of flour. 500 grams of flour in this case, and that includes the flour in the starter, by the way. So you got to make sure that if I'm going for 500 grams of flour, you then multiply that by 0.8. So for me, that was 400 grams. And then I have to subtract 50 from each. For 100 grams of starter at 50 grams of flour, 50 grams of water a piece. It looks better on paper. But then what you do at the beginning becomes 450 and 350. It's a little weird, but when you do the math, it all plays out. And if you don't want to do the math, I did it for you. So you can just follow my recipe and your gut, and it'll be fine. Cool. I hope that answers your question. So do you need a Dutch oven, or is it possible without one, by Olivia? If you could throw that one up on the screen. So absolutely, you can do it without a Dutch oven. If you take a look in my substitutions page that I've made over there in the class notes, I talk a bit about how to do it without one. So the Dutch oven serves 2 main purposes. The first is thermal mass. Big fancy word for your oven is mostly air. The oven can be 500 degrees, but what does that mean? It means that the air inside the oven is 500 degrees, as well as the surface around it, but there's not a whole lot of meat there. So when you put a big, wet, heavy thing, like a big chunk of dough in there, the temperature is going to drop significantly. Because you're letting it out already with the door when you open it and put it in, and then it's going to suck up all this heat and it'll drop a whole lot. You need thermal mass. Iron is great for that. And that iron should be, as Joy, if you're here, when I'm blacksmithing, I have a tendency of being like, oh, it's hot, I can forge it now. It doesn't need to be hot. It needs to be hot. You got to go one step beyond what you think. So if you don't have a Dutch oven, you can use, where is she? You can use a cast iron pan. So if you take one of these, this will provide a hell of a lot of thermal mass and is great for a whole lot of other things for that same reason. You put that in, and that will accomplish your thermal mass problem. However, there is a second thing that a Dutch oven does, and that is it takes all of that water that you put in and traps it around the dough. It's really important that the skin of your dough stays elastic, and for that to happen, it needs to be in a humid environment. So professional bread ovens that they use in bakeries, French boulangeries and that kind of thing, they'll all have steam injection ovens. Quick tangent, I bought a steam cleaner, like a handheld steam cleaner, because I realized that there's a vent in my oven underneath the top right burner. So if I take a steam cleaner and jam it into the vent and shoot a bunch of steam into it, I can make myself an injection. It's going to be awesome. Trust me, I won't blow up the house, I swear. But the Dutch oven traps all that steam that's in the dough already inside, and it's great for that. So if you're using a cast iron, you don't get that, but you really need it. So what you can do is take a rimmed baking sheet, and this all preheats up with the oven. You put it in there while the oven's cold and let it come up to 500 degrees for an entire hour. It's got to be hot, hot. And you have that rimmed baking sheet lined with aluminum foil so it doesn't rust. And right before you put your bread into your cast iron, you throw in a couple handfuls of ice cubes. And those are going to immediately start to vaporize when they hit that extremely hot pan, not your cast iron, the rimmed baking sheet underneath it. And it's going to release all this steam, and you can close it. And then if you have access to the vent of your oven, if you lightly place a wet dish towel over the vent to trap some of the steam in, but not the pressure, so it can still release pressure, so you're not making a pressure vessel, it's not dangerous, don't jam it in there, rest it on top, you'll trap all that steam in, and you can get that good crunchy crust. If you don't have a cast iron pan, then what you got to do is you can use just like a baking sheet, just a flat baking sheet. It's not going to provide a whole lot of thermal mass, but you can do it. Just try and get it into the oven as quick as you can, close it up, and do the same thing with all the ice cubes and all that. It'll be okay. You may not get that same crunchy crust that you're looking for. You may not get the same oven spring. Just make sure it's all hot as hell, and I promise you this, it'll be bread, and it'll be good, and you'll like eating it. But if you can, Dutch oven is real good. I hope that helps. Let's see. If it doesn't pass the window pane test, hold on, I gotta move my little chat box here because I can't read that. How do I make this go away? Aha, okay. So if it doesn't pass the window pane test, does that mean it needs to rise longer? No. So those are two different things. The rise is not what makes it pass the window pane test or not. It was hard to show this because I was already baking 4 loaves in order to do the time skips that I need to compress this long process. But ideally, there would be one more where I would show you doing the stretch and folds multiple times. You're welcome, Olivia. Thank you for coming. You would be doing those stretch and folds every multiple times and checking each time. And then once it passes the window pane test, then you let it finish the bulk rise. Or if it hasn't passed yet and it's getting near the end of the bulk rise, throw it in the fridge and keep doing your stretch and folds. If it's not passing the window pane test, it means you need to do more stretch and folds. So if your bulk rise is happening pretty quick, but it's not passing the window pane test, if you're using all-purpose flour, it may not. Put it in the fridge and still, same thing, every 30 minutes. That's just to let it relax. And don't just fold it over. Lift it, stretch it out, fold it over, turn it, lift it, stretch it out, let it kind of acclimate, put it back down, and you keep doing that until it passes. It will pass eventually. If it gets pretty close, that will do. And if you can't get it to work at all, it may be your hydration is too low. If you keep adding flour because you think, oh, this is too wet, I need to add flour, you may not have enough water to have fully had the autolyse complete. And so you'll probably need to try again with a wetter dough if that's the issue that you're having. Otherwise, yeah, it's not the rise, it's a product of the gluten. It is always better to make your bread underproofed instead of overproofed, because if it's underproofed, when you do the final proofing in the Banneton or the proofing basket, I'll get to that, and take it out and you do the poke test, I'll get to that too, and it's not quite ready yet, you can just put it back in the fridge. It's like, okay, I didn't let it bulk rise long enough, but you can make up for that in the final proofing and it'll be okay. You can't do anything if you've overproofed it. So it's always better to underproof because all those little air bubbles are still there. And that means that when you put it into the oven, it's still going to have an oven spring because all those little air bubbles, because of all the heat, are going to rapidly expand and you're still going to get a good rise in the oven underproof. I don't think I have ever been like, should have proofed that longer. But I have said, fuck, I've overproofed that so many times. So underproof, don't overproof. It'll work out. Hope that helps. I'm gonna keep drinking my beer. use regarding the flour measuring method outlined here and in the contract, should I use this method with anything I'm making, not just bread? Generally speaking, the answer is depends. It depends who wrote the recipe, which is why recipes are unreliable, and you need to use, your gut, your own, baking and cooking skills, and tests and powers of observation. Because if they're giving their measurements in, cups, for cooking, it's usually fine. For baking, it's usually not fine. For cooking, it's fine. So you don't have to do it for everything, but if you think they're the kind of people who would measure out their flour using the proper method, you probably should too. It's usually best practice because it's going to give you less flour than reaching in, scooping it, and compacting it. And you can, in most recipes, add more flour later and it'll be okay. So I recommend it, but also if you're just trying to throw together some chocolate chip cookies and you're just kind of going by texture, I wouldn't fuss about it too much. It also doesn't take that much time though, so I don't know. For bread, yes, always do it. For everything else, whatever. Hope that helps. What if you're the same color as the dough? Well, I mean, I don't have enough information to fully answer that one. Is that a problem you're having with your skin or with the dough? I can help you with one of those things. So it also depends on the kind of bread you're making. Hard to say. Yeah, I'm pretty close to that dough skin tone. Hope that helps. Do you need a Dutch oven, or is it possible without one? Oh, we did that one. Yes, yes, it is possible without one. I see, Joy, you asked, how do you know if it's underproofed? That one is a little bit tricky. So the thing is, the bulk rise, and I looked into this trying to find better, more intuitive tests that you can do for the bulk rise to tell if it's under or over, but there isn't a good one that I can find. It's pretty subjective. It's about how bubbly it is, how jiggly it is, and also what you're going to do later in the schedule. So it's probably underproofed if it's only been sitting at room temperature for an hour. It's probably underproofed. If it looks the same, it's probably underproofed. If it looks the same 8 hours later, there might be another problem, but you should at least see some bubbles. You'll know it's proved if you can at least see some bubbles. It's hard to tell sometimes if it's risen 30 to 50%, because you're not always marking on the side where it is, and it depends on the shape of the bowl, which is why professional bakers use flat bottom proofing things so that they can mark on the sides and see where it comes up to and not have to accommodate for a round bottom in the math. So it's a little bit harder to tell at this stage. Now, that is the perfect question for when we get to the final proofing. There is a test that I can do that'll show you if it's underproofed or overproofed, and which is why we kind of rush this stage a little bit, because if it's underproofed by the time you get to final proofing, well, that's fine. You can just leave it out or in the fridge overnight if it's getting late for longer, and it'll be okay up to a day. Pizza dough will be fridged for 4. It's fine. We'll get to the test. But I will cover that. So you're not going to know very definitively here at this stage, but you will have a way of knowing later. So we'll get to that. Okay, so someone just sent me a very nice message that I don't have time to read right now, but thank you, and I will read it later. Okay, so we will come back and do some more Q&A a little... off topic. What are you drinking? That is a Lagunitas brown sugar. It is, I like bitter, dark beer, so I'm enjoying it. A little side note here. So before the invention of baker's yeast, which happened in early to the mid-1800s AD, pretty recently, only 150 or so years ago, before that, in sort of the Western, mostly English-speaking world, the primary way of leavening bread was not sourdough for the most part. It was barm. So if anybody does homebrew beering, you know what barm is probably. It is the yeasty fermented foam that comes up off the beer during the fermenting process. You can skim that off and then give it to a baker, and then the baker bakes bread with it. So brewing and baking have always been deeply intertwined, all the way back to that first recipe, the bipir, the Sumerian beer recipe, all the way to barm-based breads. So there's a long tradition of beery kinds of bread. You can replicate that by making a levain, by taking a bit of your starter and then equal parts beer, usually an ale, and flour, mixing that with the starter, and you accommodate for this in your math, whip that up and you get this sort of beery thing and you let that go. And then when you add that to your dough, you get this very historically traditional kind of slightly bitter, beery kind of flavor. Or if you want something a little bit stronger, you can take bread and instead of using water, you can replace 50% of the water with a beer, depending on how strong of a beer it is. Something heavy and more bitter like this, I'd probably do less than 50. I wouldn't do 100%. And it's best if the beer is, well, actually, it doesn't need to be flat. It can be foamy. You can make it work. But beer bread, it's really good. It's good with like mix-ins and things like that. It's real good toasted. Yeah. One other real quick, I got time, so I'm going on a few tangents here. I think it's really cool to talk about the Californian tradition of sourdough because it's one of the things that we're known for. Now, I'm not San Franciscan, but I'm Californian, and we have this long tradition of sourdough bread. And the reason for this is because in most of like the great cities of Europe during much of the period after the Middle Ages, people baked using barm, with the exception of people in rural areas. People in rural areas didn't have access to making deals with breweries, usually, so they used sourdough, which was kind of seen as inferior. But then during the gold rush of 1849, all these French immigrants came to California and San Francisco, and they brought with them their preferences for bread and their baking techniques. And that's how San Francisco became known for its sourdough. It's got the right, ocean humidity that just kind of took off. But that's not really the important thing. I could make sourdough in the San Francisco style anywhere. It's not a magical property of the air. It's just San Franciscan bakers know how to do it. They're good. And they're part of this long French tradition, which is why a lot of the words that I, a Californian, use when I'm making sourdough come from the French. I talked about how we're making a boule, a ball in French, but equally we could be making a batard or a bastard. A bastard is not a baguette nor a boule. It's sort of an oval, a bastard loaf. Those are fun too. I have a batard banneton right here. I also have a boule banneton, but it's being used in my fridge. What is a banneton? Let's move on and I will show you. Okay, so if you take a look here at the bench, all right, and I lift this up, you will see that the dough has flattened somewhat. It still has its shape, but it's not quite as tall as it was before. Okay, so I'm going to throw a little bit more flour on top. And by the way, find like a jar or a container to put your flour in that's accessible. It sucks to go digging in your pantry to find some flour just to like flour up your hands or your countertop. It really sucks. Just get a little thing like this. I refill. I had to because I have a big 25-pound bag of bread flour, and that I was not just going to be dumping that onto my scale. It never would have happened. So that'll make your life so much easier. And it's like my mom gave me one of these. This is like a pinch bowl for salt and pepper. Same idea. My goodness, it makes your life so much easier instead of like having to dip. You can just like grab it. It's great. Same idea. That's another thing that falls under the French tradition of mise en place, or everything in its place. You saw at the beginning, I just had all these ingredients already weighed out and just dumped it in like they do in cooking shows. If it's a weeknight and you're just trying to cook, don't bother. But if you're like baking or cooking for fun, do all your measuring beforehand in some little bowls. They're cheap. Use Tupperware, whatever. It's a lot more relaxing when you've done all the math beforehand and you can just feel it out. It's great. Okay, so I've floured up the top of my pre-shaped boule. I'm just going to keep this nearby because I'll be using it. I'm going to flour this area just behind it from your perspective. You can't quite see it. And I'm going to flip it over to expose the unfloured side underneath. Right there. So I'm going to move this camera a little bit closer because at this point I can't move the dough. So now we have this sticky, unfloured surface at the top. We're going to do the same thing that we did before in the pre-shaping. We are going to, ooh, it's a lot tighter now. It does not want to stretch out nearly as much as it did before. So we're going to just sort of approximate a rectangle, and we're not going to work too hard. We don't want to hurt it. We're trying to help it. Just pull out those corners there. Now, I don't think I quite have enough width here to do the thirds that I did before. So I am going to do what's called stitching, where I'm going to take this side and alternate them, and then grab this corner and alternate them, so on and so forth, just stitching down the center. You can kind of pinch that shut, just like that. And then the same thing, we're gonna roll it up, just like that. Look at that height. Look how tall that is compared to how it was in the pre-shape, and before that especially. Look at that, gorgeous. It has a very strong skin. It's supple, it's smooth, it feels very good in the hands. You can see some light bubbles here. And I'm manipulating this dough in this particular way where I'm taking, so the part of your hand that you have to wash very carefully is, when you're trying to get rid of COVID, but also when you're trying to get rid of flour, is the blade of your hand. It's very easy to get flour stuck to there, but you're also using it a lot to reach under the dough to pick it up and manipulate it. So what we're going to do here is we have it roughly in its shape, but see kind of these little holes and stuff. We want to take all of that dough and tuck it up under itself and close it. And so the way that we're going to do that is we are going to use the natural stickiness of the dough in our favor. We're going to let the countertop do the work. So we're going to remove the flour from a section of the countertop, and we are going to use our bank scraper in hand and put the dough onto the unfloured surface. At this point, we've built up enough gluten that it's not going to be sticky, and we've floured the outside enough as we did that that's not going to stick too much in any way that would cause damage to the skin. And then what we're going to do is bench, and we're just going to put it at a 45-degree angle like that, and we are going to support the other side with our hand and push. Just like that, gonna push. And you can see the way that that tucks the dough up under itself. Switch to the other side. Support and push. We're gonna go the other way. Just supporting and pushing it to tuck the dough up underneath itself. Just like that. I feel like the Bob Ross of flour right now. How's that for a hashtag? All right. Now we're going to take the blades of our hands, get them nice and floured up, and we are going to pick up and push the flour together. This is a more aggressive version of the thing we just did. I'm actually meeting underneath the dough and pinching it together, just like that. Started to get a little sticky there. If it sticks, you'll tear the skin. Tearing skin is never fun. Not for the dough, not for you. So be gentle. Tuck it up underneath, just like that. And if you don't have a bench scraper to do that thing that I did earlier, you can just use your hands like this. Do a nice long pull like that. Just working the dough. Gently persuading it into a ball. Look at that. It's gorgeous. Nice, round, it's plump, it's rising off, it's supporting its own weight. It's going to gain some nice height in the oven. If it's over-proofed slightly, it'll kind of push out and you'll get this kind of triangular, roughly, shape here, but it'll still be fine on the inside. That's one thing you can tell. Ideally, it keeps this nice round appearance as it goes big and lifts up off the side. It's going to be really nice. Okay, so I have here the bowl that I had the flour in. So ideally, I would use a banneton. So a banneton is it's made of like a natural wicker kind of, it's made of like reed. And so the idea of this is that, like, one is traditional, but functionally, you place the bread in it and it like perfectly regulates the humidity. It keeps the dough in the shape that you want it, supporting it as it does its final proofing, protecting it with all the flour. And you never clean these. I did not prepare this. This is fresh off the top of my refrigerator. All this flour is just from previous baking. You leave that. You don't touch it. It's fine. When you're done, you just sprinkle a little bit more flour in. And when you bake, it'll pull out a little flour with it. It's fine. Trust me. You don't want to wash this or expose it to water. You really don't have to do anything with it at all. It'll be okay. The only microbial life in here is going to be from the yeast, which is more powerful and will kill anything else. It's fine. And then it's going to go in the oven. Don't worry about it. So I have one for a boule, but that's going to be here's one I prepared earlier. But most of you don't have a banneton. So what you probably do have is a bowl. This is a ramen bowl, I believe. This is a large one, but any sort of cooking mixing bowl will do. It's about the right size. So if you take this and take a clean dish towel, this is the clean dish towel I am going to be using, and you unfurl that and drape it over and press it in, getting into those corners. And then you just want to flour the ever living hell out of it. You can always dump out your flour and brush it off the loaf at the end. But if your dough sticks, no one will save you. There is nothing you can do because it will tear the skin and it is going to come out messy. And when you bake it, it'll be bread. You'll eat it. It'll be fine. And your roommates will be like, "Oh no, it's fine, Jenna. You didn't totally mess this up. I still like it. You toast it and it's okay. Trust me, it's fine, but we can do better. Flour it up." Okay. Actually, that's a little bit off to the side. I'm going to really rub it in there. And then the other thing that I'm going to do just as a little bit of insurance that you should do, even if you have a banneton, and definitely salt bay this thing up from high. I know in the meme he's doing it just like because he's dramatic, but really sprinkling things from higher up is going to give you a wider dispersion. So like he's going like this, but like if you just dribble it from up high, you're going to get a wide area. So if you have countertops like these, you can get like a nice wide area of flour, or like a very small specific one by going lower. So good little trick, go higher. Okay, so the other thing that I'm going to go in here and do is just flour the hell out of the loaf, rubbing it in to the top gently, and definitely getting all around the sides. In my experience, these sides are the part that is most likely to stick because it's the flour is going to want to pool into the bottom of the proving basket or bowl or banneton. So make sure to get that. Use your hands to tuck it up under there. Get it very well floured. Professional bakers will have a big bowl of flour, and they'll just kind of throw the whole thing into it and just puff up a smoke. Flour, rather. If your dough is smoking at this stage, your room is probably too hot. Okay. Just going to do a little final coercing. And then this is going to happen quickly, so I'll explain it after. I'm going to lift up, juggle, flip, drop. Okay, let's explain what I just did. So, this thing is delicate. You can't just pick it up and move it kind of willy-nilly. So this is going to be our loaf. So, real quick one. When it comes to your dough, how thick is too thick? With two C's there. Really quick, I can touch on that real quick. So this is going to be a function of your formula. If you did your math right, this is not a problem that you're going to have. If you're just eyeballing it, I think it's less about thick and more about wet. Don't twist my words. there. The water, like, it can be thick and wet and it'll be okay. If it's like dry and thick, that'll be kind of different. I think the thing to look for is its hydration, and that you can tell by all these phases, the right kind of, I was going to write this up for you, just kind of the mental script of when you're a beginner looking at it, what should happen, of like, oh, that's way too dry. Oh, that's way too wet. Oh, that's really sticky. Oh, that's really elastic. I didn't have time for that 2-8 page. This was already pushing it for, writing it up. But yeah, if you follow the formula and do your math right, that's not a problem that you should have. It'll end up being right. And if your dough is too thick with 2, 3, or 4 C's, it may be a function of the flour that you're using. Maybe you could stand to use more, maybe less. You're going to have to look at it based on those other things. And also, just real quick, you're going to fail. If you do this, you're going to fail. It's going to happen. I've baked so many bad loaves that, my roommates and myself have loved, because when you bake bad bread, it's still bread and it's fine and it's good and it's great. You can't beat fresh bread, even when it's not a great loaf. Just keep doing it. Just keep failing and eating your mistakes, and they'll taste great, and eventually you'll get a really good loaf out of it. Some things are just about training your intuition. You'll get there. Okay. So if we take a look at my simulated dough here, what I just did in that real quick movement is I put my bench scraper under it, I flicked it out, and got my hand under it. You don't need to use a bench scraper for this. You can use the blades of your hands to pick it up, and it's going to want to fall. And then I flipped it over. And see how it's going to want to spread out? Because even though we did try and press it together, it still leaves kind of like a little hole in there where it didn't quite seal because of the flour. And so you're going to want to kind of hold that in, hold it over the banneton, and just drop it in, little plume of flour. It'll work. That isn't important to the shaping of it. It's just hard to handle a dough this soft. So you just have to kind of pick it, flip it, drop it. If you're a little bit clumsier about it than that, it'll still be okay. It's just I want to have a really good surface here. So I can't really turn this without messing up the integrity of it. So I'm going to lift up the camera here a little. Can you see how there's kind of that little hole in the top of it right there? So what we're going to want to try and do here is we're going to use our stitching again that we did before and try and close that up. This is actually really good. Normally I have a much bigger one. We're just going to pinch it closed and kind of go the other way to get that closed. And we're just going to kind of grab the sides here just to get it real nice and tight here. And we're just going to pull it around kind of like we're pleating a dumpling, but there are no Chinese grandmothers around to critique your form. It can be real bad. No one's going to see this side of the dough. It's going to be on the bottom, so you can just kind of sloppily press it together just to keep the tension on the side that we do want. This is, hiding the crimes. It's shoving all your crap underneath the bed so that your mother thinks that you cleaned your room. Hi, Mom. And you're going to want to do that. Flour it up again so it doesn't stick. Oh, hello, Noah. All right. Pinch that closed. Okay. So if you have a towel here, you can then kind of fold the towel back over. I use a bare banneton. Some people have a liner that goes inside their banneton that's like a linen, and then it like elastic around the side. I don't, because this gives a very distinctive spiral pattern, and if you're properly taking care of this and getting flour into all the cracks and stuff and letting it air dry and you've been treating it properly, and there's a way to do that, but I could do an entire stream on banneton care. It creates this beautiful pattern that's very classic, very traditional, so I don't like to lose that by lining it. But if you're using this, you can just bundle it up there all nice and safe. And then now I'm going to go grab one of either a plastic bag. The best ones in my experience are the ones that individual like vegetables come in, the ones that aren't recyclable, and you're like, well, it's plastic, it should be, but it's not, it isn't. You shouldn't be throwing those in the recycling. we'll have to throw out the whole batch. They're not recyclable. I don't know if I have any of those right now, so just a bigger plastic bag will do. Let me grab one. Ah, no, I do. Okay, so this is a little Sprouts vegetables bag here. And you are going to put it inside this and make sure there's a fair amount of air inside to accommodate any growth it may have and to make sure it doesn't collapse down on it. You're just trying to keep a draft off. You're not trying to keep, okay, that's a touch more air than I want just because there's a towel in here too. I don't need to work too hard. But the plastic should not touch the top of it. And you should be able to tuck that down underneath. And then you can, usually you can wait until it passes the poke test, which could be at room temperature, an hour maybe. Or you can put it in the fridge and go overnight. That's better. That lets you build up more complex flavors. What's the poke test? I'll show you. All right. So here's the one I prepared earlier. Plastic shower caps. Those are good. I don't have any at the moment. So what I do have, I don't have it easily accessible. It looks like a shower cap, but just made of linen. I just don't trust it as much because it seems like it'd be permeable to the air. But yes, a shower cap. Those are great for this. If you're using a Banneton, you may still want to use the plastic bag just because the outside of the Banneton is permeable to air. But if you want a stronger crust, you may not care about that. You may want it to be exposed to air more, and I'm sure your mom knows best. She's the real cook here. Okay, so this is the one that has been proving, and this is the final proof. Oh man, there's a lot of flour on my tablet. Whatever, who cares? Look at that. See how it's a little bubbly on the top? Just even a little bit more so than the final, or the bulk rise was. And that's because there's a lot more tension in the dough now than there was before. So those bubbles are a lot more evident. This is probably going to pass with flying colors, but this is the poke test. Take it, and you poke it. So that's stuck to my finger a little bit. So let me flour at my finger. Let me try that again. You poke it. Okay, did you see what happened? It sprung up slightly, about halfway. It could have sprung up more. This may be closer to the side of overproofed than under. Ideally, I would like it to spring up a little bit more. So if it is underproofed, we talked about this earlier, I told you I'd get there, I got here. If it is underproofed, it'll spring up completely, like you never poked it. It needs longer to prove. It's still got some more zhuzh in it. It needs to go longer. If you poke it and you pull your finger out and it just, like Play-Doh, it just stays right there, you overproved it. I cannot help you. Bake it up. It'll be pretty flat. It'll be excellent for pain perdu or French toast or bread pudding, or eat it and it's fine. It's still good bread. Bad bread's still good bread because it's still bread. This, however, did pass, if barely, so it's ready to score and bake. Yes, poke. Can the bag pop as a sign that it's done? No. So if we were making, if we were brewing like beer or wine or something, you do need airlocks, and you need to be sure that you're not creating a pressure vessel. I very nearly made that mistake before making mead and wine. You really can't have a blow up. This is not going to be producing that much carbon dioxide. It's just not. It's not a problem. And also that bag is not a perfect airtight seal. If it ever got too much, it would just push it out. But I have never seen wild yeast produce that much carbon dioxide. And even if they did, and you were using baker's yeast, it would just make the dough rise. It wouldn't off gas in such a way that it becomes like a pressure vessel that would pop it. So no, I wouldn't rely on that. I would rely on the poke test, because that's not likely to happen. If it does, show me a picture. I want to see that. I want to see the bread that was so vigorous it popped it back. Okay, so it is time to score. This is another process that is going to happen very quickly, because the moment that I turn this out onto the bench, the clock is ticking, because this, despite everything that we did, is still subject to gravity, and we need the oven spring to cause it to spring back up and then to cook and hold its shape. And the more we wait, the more time it's going to have to fall down and relax. And in this case, we don't want that. We want all that tension. So I'm going to walk you through what I'm going to do first before I do it. I'm going to flour my countertop. I'm going to turn this over onto it. I'm probably going to run my hands along the side, just tightening it up a little bit more like we did before. Don't do it much. You should have done all that shaping before. This is just kind of like just to make sure kind of all our ducks are in a row. And then I'm going to take my lame. This is a baker's lame. What this is a razor blade on a handle. You see that? This is a razor blade on a handle bent at a slight angle with a screwed in section here. You do not need a lame. What would work is, so I have here, I got this knife set for Christmas. These are pretty good knives. They're quite sharp. You can use one of these. If you have a honing steel, you can just give that a quick hone. My technique there could be better. I'm not a chef, I'm a baker. And get this nice and sharp, and you can use this instead. A razor is better, though. If you don't have a knife that is sufficiently sharp that you trust for this kind of thing, if it's not sharp enough for you to cut paper, don't use it for this. Use even a fairly dull serrated knife will produce uglier slashes, but it'll still break the skin in the way it'll structurally work, just won't be as aesthetically pleasing. Serrated knife. Let me see what you have. Did you mean the lame? A knife! Okay, just memeing in the chat. Okay. Okay, so what I'm gonna do is I am going to then turn this out, and take my lame, and I'm going to score it. So what scoring is, you are breaking that skin that we worked so hard to create in a specific way that, like a flower blooming, is going to keep the skin on the outside, but like petals of a flower, open up, accommodating the center area here, and holding up its walls, acting like the side of a bread pan, and it'll expand up in the middle, and it's accommodating all that rise. And so you can just put a big slash in the middle, maybe 1/4 of an inch deep, if that, and it'll pull apart nicely. But traditionally, because again, Californians owe our baking tradition to the rural French immigrants of the 1800s, mid-1800s, traditionally, these more rural French people would have communal ovens for bread making, at least. And it would be a big oven, and then everyone in the town would have a baking day, and they'd all bring their bread, and they would put it in the oven, and they would bake them all at once, and then everyone would pull their bread out. The way that you would tell which bread was yours is you had a signature style that you would use when you scored it. This can be something that's, highly personal. It can be something that's for you, that's for your family, or there is a long tradition of these scoring patterns that you can pull from on the internet. There's all sorts of ways that you can decorate your bread this way. The one that I'm going to use today is 3 crosses, or 3 slashes going across each other, that as it rises is going to create this kind of pleasing diamond pattern on the surface. So I'm just going to go slash 3, turn 30 or so degrees, slash again. Thanks, the French, you done good. Yes, they did. Oh, one more thing, cornmeal. So much like the bottom of pizza, you use cornmeal, and these act as little ball bearings that are going to let your bread come off the peel. If you're using a peel, I'm not. I'm using a Dutch oven, like a peel. And that'll be really good for that. If you don't have cornmeal, sometimes you don't have cornmeal, flour, it'll be fine. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my cornmeal and I'm going to Salt Bae, because I want a wide dispersion. Sprinkle that over top of the banneton. Just going to rub it in there just to make sure there's no sticky spots. Get that bubble. We're going to get all around the sides, because man, this is going to happen quickly. Okay, I'm also going to cornmeal the bench. All right, so let me outline what's going to happen one more time. I'm going to turn out. I'm going to score. I'm going to glove up. I'm going to reach into the oven, and I am going to pull out my Dutch oven. Now, because this is all happening so quickly, you know what I can do? I can turn the camera around and face the other way so you can see it all at once, because I'm not going to have time to futz with the camera. So if I come over here, get some of these things out of the way. And, my computer's already floury. What's a little bit more? Okay. How is that? Okay. So if you can't see, my oven door is right here. So I'm going to turn this out. I'm going to score it, move the banneton so you can see, glove up. I'm going to pull out the Dutch oven. I'm going to open the lid. I'm going to lift up the bread with my hands and possibly the bench scraper if I'm feeling unsteady. And then I'm going to go over to the Dutch oven on the stovetop, and I'm going to gently place it inside using my gloved hands. Then I'm going to cover it and return it to the oven at 500 degrees, preheated at this point for like 2 hours. It's hot. And that is going to be all there is to it. It's going to go for 20 minutes. We're going to drop the temperature. And I'm going to pull out that loaf of bread and see how we did. So all told, baking for about 40 to 50 minutes, but I do have one that I made earlier. So, okay, this part always makes me nervous because this is where it's really, really easy to mess it up. But it'll still be bread. It'll still be good. Anything else I need to tell you before I do this? Yeah, I'm going to have one glove already on just to make things a little faster. So there are some other fancy baker's ways of, instead of Dutch ovens, this is just a really accessible way because Dutch ovens are useful for a lot of other things. But there are specific ones that are kind of like a Dutch oven upside down, where it's a flat kind of cast iron pan area and then a big iron thing that goes over top. And those aren't, you don't have to lower the dough in. You can put it right on and score it there and then cover it. And those are really great, and I want one sometime if anyone needs a Christmas present idea for me. So I'm going to take this and I'm going to get started. I'm going to turn out, I'm going to score, and the rest. Let's go. Getting a little bit of sticking here. That's not ideal. Ooh, here we've got a lesson what not to do right here for you. See that? See how it's stuck here to the top? It is not unsalvageable, but it is not ideal. You know, it's elastic enough. It's coming back around. It's okay. Just gonna tuck in like that, build some of that tension back up. And it's hard for you to see, but there was kind of that distinct flower spiral pattern. But because I've had to do this, because there were some shaping issues, because it's stuck, especially in the cold environment, I've mostly ruined that nice spiral pattern. So I'm going to take some flour and just sort of replace it with that and go for a different aesthetic of a lighter colored outside loaf, interspaced by darker areas where the scoring was. Then I'm going to take my lame, 3 quick slashes, 30 degrees, 3 quick slashes. I'm going to glove up. And I am going to remove the Dutch oven from the oven, place it here, remove the lid. I will pick up the loaf. I will lower it in. I will recover it, and I will place it triumphantly within the oven for 20 more minutes. Now, all of that water in there, all of that steam is just going to be trapped inside. All of that heat, it is going to rise rapidly. Depending on how long our Q&A goes, I may even have time to show you what it's going to look like in the oven. Just after 20 minutes, it's going to look like a completely different loaf. So, after you've baked, you remove it from the oven and you place it on a cooling rack. And here is the critical point. You do nothing. You are going to want so badly to cut open your freshly made loaf. But you are not done because it is still baking on the inside. Just because you've removed it from the oven does not mean that the inside is suddenly cooled. The bread's not done. And if you cut into it now, you're going to release all of the heat inside, and it's going to be doughy on the inside. You must let it finish baking on the counter at room temperature for an entire hour, if not 2. It's got to really, like, if you touch it and you're like, ooh, that's hot, it's not done. You should touch and be like, that's a little higher than room temperature at most. You got to wait. So I have one that I baked earlier that has been cooling and is ready to cut into. I'm going to turn this camera back around and we can cut in and we together can take a look at the crumb and see how it turned out. I made this just like all the others using the exact same recipe. Right there. I'm going to get out my cutting board and my bread knife so we can take a look on the inside. Let me just double check that my timer's going, because, okay, we're good. All right, there. Red knife. All right. Here is the one that I prepared earlier. Look at that. See that big rise? This was the same measurements. It grew quite a bit. You can see that it is slightly overproof. You wouldn't be able to tell looking at the crumb, but the outside has that slight triangular shape, and really we want more of a ball. Still probably going to be a really good crumb. Super crunchy when it just came out of the oven. It's softened up a little bit enough right now. Deep, well done color with flecks of char here on the edge, a little bit of flecks of flour. Really good bake on this one. So we're going to cut. Look at that. So this one, okay, this is really good to know. Okay, a little impromptu lesson here. I was wrong. This is not overproofed. This is underproofed slightly. So this is not my usual recipe, but here's how I can tell. See, notice how there's these huge air pockets here up at the top, but it's fairly dense here at the bottom. Now, if it was overproofed, it would be very uniform, but flat. The fact that this has a good rise, but is not uniform, means it needed longer in the bulk rise. Let's compare this to a loaf that I baked the day before. So this one, you take a look at the cross section here, is very even. It has these big, airy sections, but for the most part, it's about the same consistency. If we take a slice of this one, take a look at that. Kind of see the light through it a little bit, good sized holes, good crust, thickness is about right. This, I would say, is perhaps on the side of overproofed, but is a better bake. This one, the big reveal one, slightly under. This is all trial and error, you know? I've probably baked, 100 of these loaves at this point. It feels like it's probably not that many. They're just such an ordeal. But even when it's not ideal, it's still really good bread. I have to tell my roommates because whenever I have this, I make a fresh loaf of bread or like a croissant or something like that, and I eat it, I'm like, I don't know if the rise was quite right. And they're like, what do you mean? It's great. I'm like, oh yeah, I know, it's great. It's bread. It's awesome. But there's, all these ways that you can improve. Bread is super easy to get into, so easy that the first people to make it did it by accident easy, but takes a lifetime to master. I've only been working on this thing for a few years, but I promise you, you can do this too. It's such a good hobby, especially when you're locked in like this. If you're working from home, unless you're an essential worker out, in which case you can still use the 9 to 5 schedule, bless you. But otherwise, you got the time. You can pop out and just do a couple of these little things on your breaks. It's a great hobby right now. It's feeding the people. I could be giving some of these loaves to my neighbors. Potentially, we'll see. Because I have a few more in the fridge right now for me to get to. I don't know, but that's kind of my quick and dirty course on sourdough baking. Please do feel free to PM me if you have any other specific questions, but we're going to move on to our second Q&A of the live stream right now, and I can hopefully get to some of them right now. You haven't really had a chance to bake this way just yet, but hopefully I'll be able to come back to that. So let's take a look at some of these questions while I snack on this. By the way, I'm not really one of those, I'm not the usual, it's like, oh, I'm going to talk so much about the flavor. I mean, it tastes like good bread. It's entirely one type of flour. We haven't talked about the addition of other kinds of flour which have inferior gluten and protein properties. You can use about 1/4 to 1/3 of another kind of flour, such as whole wheat, spelt, or rye, for additional nutty, earthy kind of flavors. This one is entirely just the one kind of white flour. But when we think of white bread, we think of Wonder Bread. It's very sweet and tender. This is not for want of any flavor. It's due to its short rise time. It's kind of yogurt-like. It's mild and creamy. It's dominant in lactic acid as opposed to acetic acid. Lactic acid is kind of the fermented flavor component in yogurt, as opposed to acetic acid, which is the flavor component of vinegar. Vinegar is an aqueous solution of acetic acid. And you can choose which one you get. Colder environments will give you acetic. Warmer environments that are faster will give you more lactic, but both have both. It's just good bread. It has a lot of flavor without very many ingredients at all. It's good bread. Will Lorian make an appearance? We'll see. Lorian, if you don't know, is my cat, but I can go grab him. I'm going to go grab him. Josh, queue up a couple good humdinger baking questions, and I'm going to grab my cat. Lori! Here he is, Mr. America. Look at him. This is Lorian. He's a good boy. He's not allowed on the counter. Shoot. He was in the middle of a nap. He's mad at me. So to answer your question, yes. Thanks, cat. Do I have a favorite bread to bake? Yes, I do. It is very similar to this one, but it is called a tartine. If you looked at it, you would not be able to tell the difference. If you tasted it and were really good at this kind of thing, you might. I don't think I would. A tartine is, it is defined, it's really become popular in California recently. It's not the traditional Californian sourdough, but it's certainly gained in popularity. It is a sourdough loaf that isn't particularly sour. If I taste this, it doesn't taste particularly sour. It uses a very small inoculation percentage over a longer period of time to build kind of complex flavors that doesn't have an overwhelming sour taste. If you weren't knowledgeable in these kind of things, you might not know it was sourdough at all. It has a really good oven spring. It's great in your schedule, and it's kind of, you always dance with the girl that brought you. It's the style of loaf that I first really got into. So the recipe that I used for a long time and then adapted and kind of made my own, I don't think I posted it in the links, but It might come up. It was Emily's Everyday Sourdough Loaf, which was a tartine style boule. And now as I've baked more, there are a couple things that I do a little bit differently. But because it was a tartine style loaf, I mean, you dance with the girl that brought you. I like that one. There are other kinds of loaves that are more interesting. But there's just such a high skill ceiling for all this kind of stuff. You can choose one style of bread and bake it every day for the rest of your life. And I don't know that I would get tired of it because it's every little thing can be controlled. You can perfectly hone the humidity and the temperature and your scheduling and just become one with the dough. Like there's so much to learn and grow in just these simple kinds of bread that use 3 ingredients. So I don't like to overcomplicate it too much. I really like to see how far I can push just the simple ingredients. So yeah, good question. I like a tartine. Trial and error is the best teacher for this because it's all about your gut. It's all about your instincts and honing those instincts. So yes, trial and error. YouTube is also very, very good. There are some channels I recommend, and there's a reason that YouTube is so good for this. I feel like there's a resurgence in sourdough baking, not because like millennial hipsters or whatever, although it's a factor, I'm sure, but because this is not something that's easy to learn from a recipe book. It's not. It's so visual. It's so tactile. It uses your body. It's something that you have to learn from a master baker and be an apprentice, and that's why it's passed down through these lineages. You can't really just read it out of a book for any great ease, so it was kind of inaccessible for a long time. But with the advent of YouTube and this kind of stuff, you can go on the internet and watch a master baker teach you how to do it, and they will try and help you understand. And a lot of times they'll do this for free. You can go on there and see all the intricate nature of their technique, compressing these huge 12-hour, 4-day spans into snappy 10-minute videos, and you can absorb this huge amount of information that would have taken an apprentice years to master. I feel like I have been exposed to the amount of baking knowledge, not to say I've absorbed even 1% of it, but been exposed to the amount of baking knowledge that, an apprentice in ye olden times would be exposed to in, years, because the rate at which we're able to get data from things like YouTube that's visual and tactile and personal is just so much higher than before. So just devour YouTube videos. They're really fun to watch, trial and error. There's a great series by Alex French Guy Cooking. He does a great series on sourdough baking, and it's always so fun to see, a passionate French baker talk to you about the beauty of sourdough, and that's always really fun. But another good one is Pro Home Cooks. There's a link in the thing below where if you open it, it'll take him to his Sourdough U website, but his channel is just Pro Home Cooks, and there's a lot of good free knowledge there too as well. Some other ones are Joshua Weissman. He's another good YouTuber. He was pretty popular. He's a good baker, a professional cook turned YouTuber. Binging with Babish did an episode with Joshua Weissman. He's not really a baker, but there's just a lot of the good cooking YouTubers in the whole sourdough field. Got to watching someone who's good do it will save you a lot of trial and error, but ultimately it's down to you, your hands, and the dough. Hope that helps. So this is kind of a dirty tartine. It's I kind of made this recipe to be like fast and simple, frankly. So I don't know if it has like a technical name. I just wanted it to not involve these like long overnight things. Not because I don't think any of y'all could do it. Far from it. It's just a matter of waiting. But just because it was harder to take that style of baking and then make the 4 loaves that I needed to do those time jumps that I did, if it's also involving these big overnight things. So I made it to be easy for me and to work with the schedules that I linked down below. I had to kind of try them. They're not my favorite schedules. I don't know what the technical name for it is, but it is without a doubt a freestanding sourdough boule. I don't know if it has a more specific name than that. You could one-up this recipe very simply by just, hey, Lauren, stop scratching. Hey, he has all these scratching posts, like the rope ones and stuff. There's some over there. There's one in my room. He never uses them. Like couches. Shut up. I love you. What was I saying? Does Lorian ever eat your fresh bread? He hasn't yet. I haven't had him all that long. I've had him maybe a month and a half. He jumps on the counter sometimes and will smell my baking detritus if I haven't quite cleaned it up yet. He hasn't gone for, I'm not sure if it's good for them. I know some cats are really into like flour and bread and that kind of stuff. I don't want him to taste the forbidden fruit, because if he does like it, he will certainly have access. So he hasn't yet. Hope it doesn't become a problem. Fingers crossed. That's my side blog, actually. No comment. Boule is the shape. Boule is French for ball. Boule, ball, as opposed to bault, which is French for bastard, because of the illegitimate marriage of the traditional baguette and the boule to create the bastard, which is an oval somewhere in between. So yes, the boule is the shape. There are many different kinds of bread that you could bake that you could still call a boule because it is shaped like a boule. I'm just gonna snack, y'all. All right. Good on toast. Takes longer to toast than you think it would, but all right, guys, if you get the chance to try this out, I highly recommend it. It is not all that hard, and even when you mess up, it still works. So please shoot me some questions if you have them. Reach out to the resources I've linked below and talked about it here, and I'm always happy to talk baking. If you came here from my Instagram, Jenna Cordova Reynolds, shoot me a private message, and I'll always be happy to help you diagnose to the best of my ability, because I am no expert. I am just an enthusiastic intermediate baker on my good days and a very enthusiastic beginner on my worst. So please don't hesitate to reach out. Thank you guys so much for joining me for Sourdo's and Sourdon'ts. Be sure to check out some of the other videos here on the Quarantine Network. This is a new channel of just a coalition of people who are looking to share knowledge and socialize and build community, even in the time of social distancing. So it's not necessarily local, but local to the heart and personal and small and growing. So come check us out. All right, guys. Thank you so much for joining us, and hopefully I'll see you next time. Otherwise, shoot me a private message, and peace out. Bake on, boyos.